Hi, everybody. Steve Albrecht from Library 2.0. Good to be with you here today. We're with Jenn Carson. She is the author of a couple Rowman and Littlefield books. One is Beyond Books, Adult Library Programs for a New Era. And the one I really want to talk to her about today is Yoga and Meditation at the Library, a Practical Guide for Librarians. Hi, Jenn.
Hi, Steve.
Tell us about your library background and where you are.
Sure, yeah. So I'm at the LP Fisher Public Library in Woodstock, New Brunswick, Canada. I have been the director here for 8 years, going on 9 years. Before that, I did a number of things in the library field. I ran a bookmobile service. Before I actually became a director and got my master's degree, I even worked in admin, and I was like a clerk and then a supervisor. And so I sort of worked my way up from the bottom and then realized that this is really what I love to do. Went back to school, did my master's degree, and then came on board and in administration. And so my background as a yoga instructor sort of dovetailed with that because over 15 years ago now, I started teaching yoga in libraries, and I also taught it in, occupational therapy clinics and outside in different places. But I was working as a library clerk at the time. And this was before yoga was a popular thing in libraries. And God love Leslie McVicker was my director at the time. And I said, I'd like to do yoga as part of story time next week. Could I try that? And she was like, yeah, sure, why not? We just tried. And we had such a great response that we started creating just a yoga program for kids in the library, just like a one-off thing. And it had really good results. And then I said, well, maybe I'll do it for adults too. And I had done my yoga teacher training for kids, but I had never done my yoga teacher training for adults. I was a practitioner myself I have been practicing yoga for over 20 years. But I thought, well, I'll go back to school and, on the side and do my teacher training, which takes a while because it's like 200 hours. And so I did that. And then I started teaching adults in the library. And the response was just so great that when I did go back to school and did my master's degree, instead of doing a regular thesis, I asked Denise Augusto at Drexel University, where I did my MLIS, if I could do a special project on kinetic programming, which at the time wasn't really much of a thing. I mean, I did a lot of research and I found out that there's actually libraries that have been teaching physical literacy programs for years. They just didn't call it that. I mean, there's libraries that in the 50s had squash courts and had, all kinds of like sport related programming. But it was just sort of like a niche thing. And so I started digging deeper, and I partnered with Noah Lenstra from the University of Greensboro in North Carolina. And we did a survey, the first survey of its kind, of libraries all across Canada and the US, asking what people had in their libraries that might be considered, we just called it like movement-based programming. And the results were outstanding. There were so many librarians all over the place that were offering all different kinds of things. Yoga was absolutely the most prevalent, but there was like Zumba classes, and a lot of people were doing movement programs as part of their story time, like, doing little activities with kids. But there was all kinds of stuff. There was dance programs. There was, like stuff you'd never even think about, running clubs. And so anyway, that got me, sort of thinking that. And my research project I did as my master's degree. And then so I wrote my first book, which was actually with the American Library Association, called Get Your Community Moving: Physical Literacy Programs for All Ages. And then I think it was that year, I also got the Mover and Shaker Award from Library Journal for all of my work, kind of bringing to light all of the physical literacy programming that was happening.
That's
and
kind
so
of a literal
shortly after
award,
that,
right? You are a mover and a shaker, and you got
yeah, right.
awards,
So
that's
who
kind of
knew?
literal.
So after that, that's when Rowman and Littlefield reached out to me, and Charles said, hey, this is a thing, do you want to write a book about yoga, like specifically about yoga and meditation? Because the physical literacy book touched on it. It had a chapter about it. But he was like, you need a whole book just about this, because I also made the website yogainthelibrary.com, which I'm just in the middle right now of revamping, because it's been around since, I don't know, like 2018 or 2017. So it's looking sort of maybe even before that, because I think I graduated in 2015. So it might be that old. So it's looking sort of dingy in internet terms. So we're revamping it right now. But yeah, he's like, your yoga in the library website is super popular and people want more information about this. And they want to know how to offer yoga programs in their own libraries. Like, can you write a whole book about it? And I was like, dude, I can talk about this for hours. Like, yes, I can write. And then I kept sending in chapters. He's like, okay, enough. We have all the information we need. And so, yeah, so that's sort of how that's a very short version of how I got here. But
how do you define physical literacy? What's the definition for your from your standpoint?
Yeah, so physical, I mean, I can go dig out my book and read you the textbook definition, but basically physical literacy is like the awareness of your time, of your body as it moves in time and space and in different circumstances. So, you know, obviously like you walk differently on grass than you do on sand or in snow. You move your body differently depending on what activity you're doing. You use your stomach muscles differently when you're sitting than you do when you're standing. And it also applies to people with physical disabilities as well, right? So you're going to move your wheelchair differently on sand than you would on grass or on concrete. And so it's sort of that temporal awareness of where your body is in time and space. And it's something that happens through the whole life course, right? So you have building blocks of physical literacy. So things that we teach children, we build upon into adulthood. So kids don't start off holding a pen, you know, with this nice little pincer grip, right? They start like just grabbing, you know, they just sort of grab stuff. And so it's really important that we teach kids not to do this forever, or, you know, they do sort of caveman their way through life. And so we start with the fine motor skills of like pinching, right? And then eventually they draw and they write and then that forms their textual literacy because they can now draw and write. And so physical literacy is very closely tied to our other literacies, because if you can't hold a pencil, you can't write anything. And if you can't hold a book, you can't read, right? And so thinking about how we build on that through adulthood. So if you never learn how to throw a ball properly, for example, so like I have a little ball here. So I hate not to be gendered, but there's that horrible saying, like, you throw like a girl. And you know, you have that little punt of a throw.
Shot put.
Well, some of us never outgrow that.
Right.
You know, like, you know, adults who still, men or women, that throw, you know, kind of like this, and they never learn that full overhand wind up throw. That's a whole body movement, right?
Sure.
You know, you're fully extended. And so your physical literacy affects you all the way through your life, because if you're still, you know, people who bowl like this, you know, if you never learn how to do a proper overhand throw, then you're probably less likely to play sports that involve that, like football or frisbee or bowling or, you know, all different kinds of things. And so it's the same with like swimming. If you never learn how to swim properly, you're less likely to go on a boat.
Sure.
Or go surfing or things like that. And so our physical literacy affects us all the way to adulthood. But the good news is that it's never too late to learn.
So my wife was a softball player in high school. And so when I was dating her 35 years ago, one of the reasons I fell in love with her, she threw really hard softball. My hand hurt. We would play catch and you know, out in the street. And I'm like, I'm going to marry this girl. She throws like a Nolan Ryan, a major league pitcher. So
yeah.
One of the things I'm, you know, thinking about when you're talking about that is the way people learn. You know, we have visual learners and auditory learners, and then what we would call kinesthetic or haptic hands-on learners. And it seems to be most studies of things, especially kids and maybe in adults, that hands-on learning tends to be the one where there's the most imprinting, the most sort of connection to what's being taught. And so it sounds like that's right up your alley in terms of the hands-on haptic kinesthetic approach.
Definitely. And most studies show that all children up until about age 7 learn primarily physically. And so that's why, you know, there's a lot of studies that caution teaching children to read too early. You know, let them play with physical books for sure, like as a tactile thing, and look at them and enjoy them and look at the pictures. But forcing children like to learn phonics and things like that at too young of an age turns it into work and can actually turn children off of reading. And because for the majority of people up until age 7, you only really learn kinetically. That's how children explore their environment. That's why babies babies put everything in their mouth, right? It's mouth feel. And so some adults, that still remains their preferred way of learning. It's not like you outgrow it. It's just the way that you're most comfortable, and that's okay. But I think a lot of people that are kinetic learners get missed in school for sure. Sitting in a desk all day doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah, and especially put in the ADHD piece and some of the dyslexia pieces and all that stuff where they're maybe not obvious at the time. What's wrong with this kid? Why has he got ants in his pants, and why can't he sit still? And that's why a lot of them get into physical movement and sports and things as a way to channel all that energy.
Yeah, I would argue that there's a large component that kids that have ADHD, maybe it's not so much a disorder as in they're not being taught in a way that appeals to them in the way that their brains are.
And channels into what's best for them. I'm
Exactly.
always fascinated. I'm a 61-year-old guy, and back in my day, libraries, really the thing that was most common for programs for the community was either child literacy or adult literacy.
Yeah.
So adult literacy is those adults that never learned to read or had learning disabilities or English is not their first language. And I was always, back in the day, 30 years ago and there was always these programs that were sort of existed in the library. But now, like you say, you look at the research you did for your master's and the things for your book, the exposure to so many programs in the community. I mean, we have libraries that do AA meetings, and everybody under the sun is brought into the library for various community groups and civic groups and things. It always amazes and pleases and fascinates me that the scope of what has taken place in the library has really expanded to incorporate so many interest groups and people that we probably wouldn't think about as being library users. And so I think there's just been this great evolution away from it's all about reading and books into, so many other things.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's formed as a sort of necessity, because as more and more people get their information online, less people are necessarily seeing libraries as a requirement in their sort of civic life. It's like, oh, well, we don't really need to go to library. We can just Google everything or order books on Amazon or download things on our Kindle. And so there's been a major shift to libraries, continuing those services. And in fact, lots of studies show that in times of, like, for example, recession or when high periods of inflation, people actually flock to libraries and use libraries more because it's much harder to pay for things, when you have so many other bills to worry about.
Sure.
But in those times more of plenty, people were missing key components in their lives for socialization. And so coming to a library became sort of more like a place to hang out and to do things and to meet other people, because let's face it, our digital culture, we're plugged in and we're connected to people. We might have 600 Facebook friends, but how often do you actually just like go out for coffee with somebody and talk face to face? Or do something with somebody and everybody's not on their phones, or oh, I gotta run off to something else. And we all have really busy lives. And I think one of the nice things about libraries is it's sort of like a gathering place, because our cultures used to have a lot of sort of fundamental gathering places. Like, for example, churches would be one of them, as something, so everybody saw each other at church every Sunday. And as our culture has moved away from sort of religiosity being a tenet for a lot of people, I mean, obviously some people still do, people are looking for other places where they can gather and meet people and make connections, and something that's not part of capitalism. You don't have to go spend any money to do it. It's nice to go to the movies or go out to dinner, but not everybody has the income to do that. But everyone can come to a free dance class at the library, as long as they're able-bodied. But there's all kinds of other programs that are available for people of various abilities, right?
I think about the closeness of taverns in New England during the Revolutionary War. They, basically, can we get there within walking or riding distance? And that's where the formation of all these meetings about the Declaration of Independence, et cetera. When you look at
exactly.
When you look at yoga in the library, it's a. I mean, talk me through sort of the process. Do you suggest that they find outside instructors, or if you're lucky enough to have a library employee who is an instructor for yoga, there's got to be a room that's fairly comfortable, not necessarily mats, but you know, if we use yoga mats, we provide those. Kind of walk me through the process of how you do it. My mom does silver sneaker yoga, chair yoga. You know, she's in her 80s and she loves it. And so is it, you know, do you think about the specific classes for the elderly, specific classes for kids? I mean, kind of what's the overarching sort of a plan?
Sure. Well, one, obviously it's up to your library's capacity. So the first thing is to, regardless of whether you have a librarian on staff that's trained or a clerk or a volunteer, before you even have a human, is really thinking about what do you have the time to offer, right? Because you know, a small rural library where you might only have 1 or 2 staff members, you might not have time to take an hour or 45 minutes out of your day to teach a yoga class, or you might not have the physical space if you have a really small building, but that's an opportunity to offer a class online. Because I did that a lot during COVID, is
Wow.
I just set up a little yoga mat, and we did a Facebook feed on our library Facebook page, and I just did a class, and I kept it short, you know, something people could manage at home with kids and work and stuff, and, you know, maybe half an hour, and we did a little class. And, you know, and I was like, see you guys next week. And then we turn it off. And the recording was there. So if people couldn't make it at whatever time I'd schedule it at, they could watch it anytime. So there's no reason why you couldn't do that at your branch if you don't have the physical space, or if you don't have the time capacity in the day that works for everybody. You could do it during, like, after hours. Like if you come in at 9 but you don't open till 10, well, you could record it, you know, in that time in between.
Sure.
Now, if you do have the space, you don't need a lot of space. It depends on how many clients. You know, if you're a great big city and you're expecting 50 people to show up, well, obviously you need the capacity for it. But you can always require registration and limit the numbers of people that can come. As for the age demographics, I offer most of our classes to the general public. And so that means anyone can come within reason. You know, like if somebody shows up with toddlers to a yoga class, I'm like, this isn't really going to be happy for the toddlers. So I would recommend you come back another time and come to our family classes. And so a few times a year, I try to offer, like usually around International Yoga Day or Physical Literacy Day or something like that, I try to offer a family yoga class. And we kind of keep it more games oriented. So we'll do a little bit of yoga, but you know, there's those yoga cards. I was just looking if I had some right here. You can pull yoga cards out of a deck, and then they can take turns trying out the poses. We'll play all sorts of kind of like fun games. So it's not just like a regimented class. And then as for the elderly, I have offered chair yoga classes before, but most of the general yoga classes that I teach are for the general public, and they're adaptable to anybody. And so I can grab a chair if somebody needs it, or I modify the poses for whoever's available. If you have a disability or you have, you know, a shoulder injury or health issue or something, I can, you know, I have people that have MS in my class, you know, and they're wobbly. Okay, we're going to hold on to a bookshelf. So we can, you know, yoga teachers are usually pretty good about modifying things.
Yeah. So
As for having
blocks too, you can provide perhaps if you need to, and also mats if necessary.
Yeah, so I've applied for lots of grants over the years. So we've had the generous donors in our community. And so we have probably 20 or 30 yoga mats, and we never get more than that for a class anyway. And we have probably about 20 yoga blocks. And we
explain what those are, the block.
Hmm?
The pads, explain what a block is, the pads.
Oh, a block, we have like 4-inch high foam yoga blocks, and you can get smaller ones too that are about 3 inches. You can get ones that are about 2 inches. We have the nice big thick 4-inch ones. You can also turn them sideways so they're not as thick. And then we have yoga straps. I recommend getting the longest ones you can, because some people have really long limbs, and reaching it around their foot, you know, it's fine for a little lady that's 4'8", but you get a 6-foot tall dude in your class and he's going to want a longer strap. And
so the function of the blocks is just to help people that don't have full range of motion. And
yeah, Yeah, absolutely. Or like they have all kinds of fun uses. I don't have time to get into all the ways that you can use blocks, but they don't have to just be like for helping. There's all kinds of things that you can do with blocks that are games and stuff like that. And there's a lot of details in my book with infographics. And if you go to my website, there's free handouts of all kinds of ways you can use blocks. Like you can squeeze a block to help your pelvic floor. So if you just had a baby and you're trying to recover some pelvic floor, you really want to squeeze that block between your legs when you do a whole lot of your poses.
So I'll put on my risk management hat for a second. Do we have any liability issues in terms of injury, and you have people sign waivers and stuff like that? How does that all work?
Yeah, for sure. So it's always a good idea. We don't have the same penchant for litigation that you have in the United States and Canada. I'm trying to say that as diplomatically as possible for my United States brethren.
Too many lawsuits.
So yeah, we just don't have that as much here, but it doesn't mean it's not possible. So for sure, we always get people doing any kind of physical activity in the library to sign a liability waiver. I believe you guys call them hold harmless forms.
Sure.
I mean, is that going to protect you 100% in court? Probably not. But it at least is a written acknowledgement that someone understands the risks that they're undertaking when they go into your program. And that, it's been made clear to them. But of course, like they also have to know what they're signing, because you may have people coming to your programs that are low literacy. And they're like, yeah, sure. And they just sign something and they didn't actually read it, or people whose language is English is not their first language. And so, they may be newcomers to your community and they're coming in to try some program at the library, trying to meet people, but they might not speak English very well. So they're like, yeah, and they just sign your form. But again, so the form is only as good as it is good, right? And so we try to have injury prevention more than anything. And I always explain to people in the class, like, we're not here to try and prove anything. Yoga is not a competitive sport. You don't need to touch your toes. You don't need to look like a pretzel. We're not trying to be on the cover of Yoga Journal. Nobody's here to look good. We're just all suffering together.
No one-armed handstands in the first hour.
Yeah, no, I don't teach handstands in the first hour. That's for sure.
So a big part for me for yoga and my practice has always been the breathing and the pranas, and the idea that it's like you say, not competitive. I'm just trying to get through that session and be just a little bit better than I was in the previous one. And so talk about the value of the breathing and really that stress management piece, and teaching people to stop chest breathing and more diaphragm and belly breathing as a way to really get into more kind of self-controlled relaxation and more self-stress management.
Oh yeah, for sure. So most of the time most adults spend a whole lot of time breathing in the top part of their chest. So you have 5 lobes in your lungs. You got 2 on the left side to make room for your heart and 3 on the right side. And so most people just breathe sort of really shallowly, and their shoulders go up and down. And so every yoga class, the first thing I do is give everybody a bean bag. And so they take their bean bag and they put their bean bag, they lay on the floor in Shavasana, and they put their bean bag on their belly. And this is the first thing I teach them, and it's the last thing we do at the end of class. And I just say, as you inhale, your belly goes up. And as you exhale, your belly comes in. And I'm always like, try not to have judgments about your belly. Don't worry about it sticking out. Inhale and exhale, and just retraining people to breathe down into their diaphragm. And, sort of, I say, like, puff out your kidneys, like breathe with your whole belly. And then I remind them, like, if you watch little kids running around, their little like Buddha bellies hang out, right? Like, or if you watch someone sleeping, like, don't be creepy, but, watch your partner sleeping and their belly will go up and down, because that's the natural way we breathe when we're relaxed. Sure. But as soon as we go into fight or flight, we start breathing really shallowly, and it turns off our digestive system and all that stuff, and we go into panic mode. And so your body's flooded with like cortisol and adrenaline. And that's great if you're being chased by a polar bear, but if you're just sitting in traffic, or like, arguing with your spouse about asparagus at dinner, like, it's okay, it's cool, like your body doesn't need to go into like hyper alert mode. But for some reason, that's just the way we've trained ourselves, and it's really hard to like unstick. And so pranayama, or like yogic breathing, is a really great way to like reset that nervous system. And so just taking 10 minutes, I try to tell people, like, set a reminder on your phone to ding every like couple hours, and it'll just be like, oh, what's that ding for? Oh, right, breathe, and like remind people to breathe properly. And I think honestly, that's the most important part of my yoga class, is like getting people to just stop running around and worrying about things and just like sit on their mats and or lay on their mats and just stop being and stop doing and just like breathe. And a lot of people think, you know, like you've said, you're a meditator yourself and you've worked on pranayama. There's this huge misconception that meditation is clearing your mind. And anyone who goes into it with that sort of goal is going to fail miserably and think they're the worst at meditation. Well, join the club. Like, you know, your mind can't stop thinking. That's what it's there for. Just like you don't want your heart to stop beating and you don't want your lungs to stop breathing. You don't want your brain to stop thinking. Like that's what it does. It's scanning the horizon, looking for danger. I mean, that's what it's there for. But once you can sort of remove yourself from that and be like, oh, thank you, brain. You're trying to keep me safe. And some of us have really like overactive brains that are like really concerned. And they're like really,
Yeah.
really trying to keep us safe. And once you sort of turn that on its head and be like, oh, my brain is just trying to help me, you know, like it's just trying to help me. It's not trying to hurt me. It just feels that way.
Yeah.
Then you can just sort of watch yourself. And I always remind people that yoga is a moving form of meditation. And we're trying to link the breath with the postures. And as we get more and more into that process of breathing and moving with the breathing, we're so now we're not really thinking about that asparagus or thinking about what we're going to eat for lunch or the bills we have to pay or the doctor's office appointment we need to make or whatever, because we're so concentrated on like, oh, I'm trying to touch my toe. Like, you know, or like, right, she said to breathe into my belly. Okay, I'm doing that. And so like we're so caught up with just our physiology, and that's that physical literacy piece, is like it's really hard to be in your head and be in your body at the same time. And as soon as we can get people out of their heads, let your brain do its thinking. You know, they're like little clouds in the sky, let them pass. Your brain's just going to keep thinking. But once you stop concentrating on it and paying so much attention to it and just get into what's happening in your body, suddenly you're not really that concerned with those thoughts anymore, right? They just become another thing that's happening to you.
So in your communities, how do you find good skilled yoga instructors to come into the programs? And you got to pay them some kind of honorarium
Sure.
or stipend or something. How do you do that the best way?
Sure. I mean, obviously, when I teach, I'm here at work. So, you know, I'm already working. There's no need to pay me. But if you're not lucky enough to have a yoga instructor on staff, the first thing that I always do is I reach out to, we're very fortunate that we have multiple yoga studios in our town. And so I reach out to my colleagues at those studios and I ask them if they'd be interested in teaching at the library. I ask them what their rates are to teach a group class. If their rates are more than I can afford, or our board can afford, we think about ways we can do fundraising. There's a lot of wellness grants. I mean, I've gotten so many wellness grants. That's how we paid for all of our equipment over the years. You can look on things like Grant Connect or other grant software and just type in wellness, health, exercise, yoga, meditation, any of those things, those sort of tag words. And you can find all kinds of grants that will help cover the cost of instructors or supplies. The other thing is reach out to yoga schools in your community, because whenever teachers are doing training and upgrades, even those of us that already have lots of hours of experience, if I go and do an upgrade, you have to have so many teaching hours, and they have to be karma, they have to be free teaching hours in order to qualify for your next level of instruction. So there's actually teachers in your community that are desperate to teach public classes. There may be a trade-off, like you may need to write up a little report about their class, or they may need to like allow part of it to be filmed to prove that they did it. But like I had a teacher here in the community, I was going away for a few weeks and I reached out to her and I said, hi, I know you're doing your 500-hour teacher training right now, and I need someone to cover my classes while I'm gone. Would you mind doing some of your karma classes here at the library? And she said, as long as they don't mind me being filmed, I don't need to film them, but I need to have a camera on me showing that I'm teaching. And I'm like, I don't think anybody will be minding. They're not going to be on camera. And so that worked out great. I got a free teacher and she got to get her hours. And so, you know, don't be afraid to ask people to volunteer their time. They may be happy to do that, but also respect that, you know, people need to be paid as well.
Yeah, I think and also in for me in all the cities I've lived in, I belong to a gym a national chain, and oftentimes they have yoga classes at those national chains, and you can talk to the instructors about coming over to you as well in the library. Just to wrap up on a little story, which is so sad to me. I was at a community session where we brought a yoga instructor in, and it was for stress management. It was just a sort of a get to know you stress management, kind of what is yoga and what is mindfulness meditation all about. And it was a bunch of city employees. And the instructor, she was a yoga instructor and also, really skilled in stress management. She said, I just want you to close your eyes for 1 minute and focus on your breathing. And just 1 minute. We'll just set a time limit for 1 minute. So everybody closes their eyes, and about 45 seconds in, we hear crying. And we open our eyes, and there's a lady in the back, and she's crying. And the instructor said, what's the matter? What happened? And she said, no one ever gave me permission to take care of myself. No one ever told me that I could do this just for me. And it was just so heartbreaking to think about, some people are so caught up in their careers and their family and their stress and all the things that are going on. And just, where's that little moment, like you talked about, where you say, I just want to do this one thing, just this one little piece that's just about me. And it's not selfish, it's nourishing. And so I always think about that story. And, I think about all the people that, you may meet in a library environment that just have so much trauma and background issues and stuff going on in their lives. And maybe what you're trying to give them is just one little moment's, an hour, 45 minutes respite from whatever's going on.
Yeah, I always tell students, thank you for sharing that story. I always tell students, like, this is your space. And so this is not boot camp. I'm not going to yell at you if you don't do the pose. If you want to come in and lay in Shavasana for an hour, fine by me. I have had
tell us what Shavasana is. It's my favorite pose because
you just lay like you're dead, corpse pose, and
it's
like a star. You lay like a big starfish, and you just close your eyes and you breathe. That's it. Or child's pose, where you lean down and just lay like a baby on the mat. I had a lady come one time, and she did child's pose for like the entire class, and she wept. She had been going through a whole lot of stuff in her life, and I said, would you like to be touched? And she said, please. And I just went over and like rubbed her back like a baby, like I would do with my babies. And I just rubbed her back, and I said, it's okay. You just stay like this as long as you need. And she stayed like that for the whole class. And the rest of us just went and did all our poses. And you know what? Like, it's a safe space. It's a space where people can come and there's not judgment, and you don't have to look a certain way. And that's the nice thing about offering it in libraries, is it's not a gym environment. You don't have to worry that there's going to be a bunch of 20-year-olds there in Lululemons, like, sort of thing, which is fine. That's its own thing. But like, that's not what we're here for. And
it's not a Peloton commercial.
Right, exactly. And so like, it's, that is not the environment. Like, I taught a yoga class today at lunch, and I would say everyone in my class was, I'm 42, and I was probably one of the youngest people there. Most of them were in their 70s and 80s. And, they were joking like, I'm going to get down, but I don't know if I'm going to get back up. And I'm like, cool, we don't close till 5. You got time.
That's like, awesome.
And so that's okay. And, and I don't want anyone to come to class feeling like they have to achieve something, because so much of our culture is about achieving and productivity, and our worth is tied into that. And I want everyone to have worth regardless of whether they've produced something today.
And I think, what you talked about too, for me, has kind of a trickle down effect. Maybe the yoga gets them thinking about breathing, and maybe the breathing gets them thinking about little changes in diet. And maybe the yoga gets them thinking about little time management, where they're not 1,000 miles an hour all the time. And I think it's just, it's that rising tide floats all the boats. And I just think it's awesome what you're doing. And I appreciate your contribution to the library world.
Well, thank you. I grabbed my book when we were talking before, because you said about ants in your pants, and it jogged my memory, because I dedicated the Yoga in the Library book to my grandmother, who's long deceased. But she, she was like, I come from a British family, and she was like the strong, quiet, matriarch of our family. And she never, there was not a lot of tears or a lot of emotion. She was a very good person, very stoic. Yeah. And like, and so loving, but in her like very quiet British way. And she was always like, I was just like this kind of kid, as you can imagine, always doing 100,000 things. And she was always trying to just like get me to breathe, and just like sit in a church pew, like trying to get me to sit in a hard church pew for an hour, near impossible. And so I dedicated the book to her, and I said, for Janet, who taught me how to sit quietly. I'm sorry, I still have ants in my pants.
Perfect. Yeah.
But that's how I got into yoga, is because I mean, yoga teachers are, there's something wrong with all of us. Like, there's a reason we became yoga teachers. You teach what you most need to learn. Like, I needed to learn how to slow down and breathe. I needed to learn how to accept my body as it was with what I could do with it today. I needed to learn how to be quiet. And yoga did that for me 20 years ago when I started it. And it's carried me through my adulthood.
Yeah, so thanks for your contribution to the library world and to the larger world. We've been talking with Jenn Carson. She's the director of the library in Woodstock, New Brunswick, Connecticut. Her books, Beyond Books, Adult Library Programs, and also for a New Era, and also Yoga and Meditation at the Library, a Practical Guide for Librarians. Jenn, one more time, your website?
Oh, it's easy. JennCarson.com, JennCarson.com. And there's all kinds of free things if you go under resources. I have an agreement with all of my publishers that any infographics that are in the book or any of the books are free to share, because I don't think you should have to buy an $80 textbook if you want to learn a little bit. I'm a librarian, free access to information, man. So you just go on there and you can print out those PDFs. Most of them have been translated into French because I'm in Canada and we speak both of those languages.
Thanks a lot, Jenn. Appreciate your time today.
You're welcome.